Hello, and welcome back for another session of On Book, the Old Globe Shakespeare Reading Group. My name is Danielle Mages Amato. I'm the literary manager and dramaturg of the Old Globe. And on behalf of our staff and board and artists, I want to welcome you to our session today. I hope some of you have seen the announcement I posted in the group today. The Globe has just announced that we've postponed our Summer Shakespeare program from 2020 to 2021. And so what I've asked folks to do is let me know what you'd like to do with this group now that we're moving forward beyond the plays that we're going to read for the Summer Shakespeare Festival this summer. So please do take a moment. Let me know if you'd like to continue. Let me know what kind of things you'd like to see the group do in the future. Well, I'm very happy to have a guest returning today, Ursula Meyer. I'm just going to bring you on here, Ursula. Hello, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be back.
We are wrapping up our discussion of Henry V this week, and I've invited Ursula on because as a voice and speech person, she has a particularly insightful view of how the text is being used in the play and how particular texts break down. And we wanted to talk a little bit about something called rhetoric in the play and how it works in some of the motivational speeches. But maybe for folks who might not have seen our last session with you, Ursula, would you remind us, what does a voice and speech person do on a Shakespeare production?
Yes, and I've been lucky to work on 5 or 6 of them at the Globe in the summers. I help people understand what the words mean. I help them say them in such a way that the audience understands what they mean. I help with pronunciations, accents, builds, and one of the main things that I do is I help take apart the rhetoric, because Shakespeare loved to use the art of persuasive speaking, because when he was the Elizabethan schoolboy, the teachers didn't have a whole lot of books and things. They would put a title of a subject on the board, like war, and then the student would pick pro or con, either one, and they would argue back and forth with the teacher. And that was school. That sort of back and forth, creating an argument. And then the next day you might have to take the opposite side. And so Shakespeare learned, or the Elizabethan schoolboy learned, this art of using all these various techniques to persuade. And that's all over Shakespeare's speech. One of my favorite actors always says, "What is the argument?" And one of my favorite dramaturgs, I think I said this last time, other than Danielle Amato, is Louis Douthit, who always says, "What is the dilemma?" And so each character is always arguing for something, trying to persuade. And this speech in Henry V is one of the greatest persuasive speeches of all time, let alone in Shakespeare.
The speech that we're going to take a look at is often called the St. Crispin's Day speech. Is Henry V a play that you particularly like, Ursula? What's your take on Henry V as a play?
I think it is absolutely brilliant. I think it's, and it's, as a woman, I'm looking forward to the days when I could play some of those parts, or the actresses that I work with can play some of those parts, but those are coming. But it is mostly about men going off to war and the intricacies of that. But it has such an incredible journey. It was written, see, I have this down. It was his last history play for 10 years, a year before Hamlet. And it, like a good showman, it was the third in a series, like the Star Wars trilogies. It was the third in the series, and he really built towards this true event in English history of this young kid who did this amazing, had this amazing, very, very short reign as king, and is thought forever and after as one of the greatest kings in English history. I mean, that tells a story. I have here one campaign. The young king wants France. He gets an army. There are skirmishes. There's one magnificent battle, which this speech is about. He wins. He asks for the king of France's daughter in marriage and returns home victorious. He dies young, and his son, Henry VI, is a terrible king. And then we have the War of the Roses, many, many years of awful leadership.
This is a shining moment before the years of awful leadership.
It is. It absolutely is. And it was such a powerful play about English history that in World War I, it was produced as a propaganda piece to help the soldiers feel good about fighting for England. And in World War II, Winston Churchill asked Olivier to make a movie about it to promote the war. And then very interestingly, I think the Kenneth Branagh film is quite strong, but he reacted the other way after the Falklands crisis, and makes it much darker, much more complicated and ambiguous. And there's a very beautiful anti-war speech that is in the play that Lincoln had by his bedside as a source of pain that we're not looking at today. But if you can find it, it's a speech by a small character called Williams. And it is a speech that's quite valid about, well, what does it really cost the little man? These wars that are decided by people way up in the heights.
Well, one of the things I really I loved this part where we could dig really deep into the text and look at, lines and chunks of text at a time. Maybe we're gonna look at this St. Crispin's Day speech. Would you situate it in the play for us? Remind us where it happens.
Okay, so whether you agree with it or not, King Henry decides he wants to conquer France. There's a very, very long speech at the beginning of the play that says how it's passed down to the mother and he has a claim to it. It's a little iffy. But he goes and he says to the French king, you have to give us France. And they say, you're crazy. We're not going to let you do that. And so he starts this campaign of marching. And they've been through quite a few months of slogging through mud, and they're ill, they're depleted, their hearts are low, and they are meeting the French in this particular battlefield, Agincourt, a wonderful place to visit in France, because it's really there.
Have you been?
Yes, my husband did. Actually, my husband, Jamie Newcomb, who's also a wonderful Shakespeare actor, did the fights for the production of Henry V that I did in Ashland, coached in Ashland with the great Marco Baricelli as Henry V, Patrick Page as Montjoy. And he wanted to go to Agincourt to really feel what that battle was before he did those fights. And so, it wasn't that interesting to see. There were no words there, just a field. But for him, it was a huge, huge thing. And I think for most English people, because it's their history, this idea that they were so outnumbered by the French had all shiny new uniforms and lots of shiny metal and beautiful horses. And there were, 36,000 of them and 5,000 English. And it was a huge upset. It's one of the great upset stories. So in order to get these poor, tired, hungry, and it was raining and muddy, to get them to say, yes, we're going to go out and give our all, when they could see the French all fancy on the hill, how did he motivate them to do this? And there's a blogger, Steve Rapson, who has a whole thing on the internet about how this speech, anybody who wants to be a motivational speaker should study this speech. And even in public speaking, which I also teach at UCSD often and do workshops on it, it really follows a lot of the rules of great public speeches. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And then using the devices of jokes, using the devices of making you feel like you're one of them, but also raising them up to a place where they feel like if they do this, they will feel more powerful, more important. And then also establishing your credentials and repetition, which he does really well, which we'll look at in the speech, but also the monosyllabic line. Shakespeare wrote in if you look at the King James Bible that was written at the same time, this whole amazing shift in language where we had Latin-based words, which came from Latin, and Anglo-Saxon words, which came from the street. And Shakespeare is one of the greatest poets of all time at putting those words together. He has a fancy word like unparalleled. I don't know if I said this last time, but he came up with the prefix un. Nobody did it before that. Unparalleled to describe Cleopatra, but then he puts next to it the word lass, L-A-S-S. He calls her a lass unparalleled, because she's just a girl in love with a boy who marries somebody else, but she is the most beautiful woman on earth, unparalleled. And then he calls the snake later in the speech an asp, very small word, very tiny snake, unpolicied, That little snake brought down the Queen of Egypt. So that juxtaposition of polysyllabic words and Anglo-Saxon words, words of the street, is very powerful. And in plays, like in this speech, he has whole lines that are just one-syllable words that they would all understand right away. And then there's another rhetorical device where all the words in a verse line are one syllable except one, except England or fellowship. And so it really lifts that one word up. And so that's that's a very simple thing. But if you start to listen for it, you see how he's engaging the common man, making himself one of them, and then occasionally throwing in these power words that support his argument.
Great. Oh, well, Henry V should have been so lucky as to have Shakespeare as his speechwriter.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just saying that even in the Branagh, every time I show it, I teach a Shakespeare film class, and every time I show it, even though it's very dark and it's very ambiguous whether he really should be getting France, when that speech is over, all the students are just like, yes, go to war. Because it's just, the build of it is just so powerful.
Well, fantastic. I'm eager. Do you want to get started?
Sure.
Okay. I'm gonna hide my little self here so that we can see the text more clearly. All right, so let's pull some of these up.
So this is the morning. This is the morning of the battle. And he spent a whole night walking around, and I call it he has a kind of Gethsemane speech where he prays for help because he doesn't know how he's going to get these men to come around because they're all so sick and tired. And he wakes up this morning, and his cousin, a nobleman, he hears him in the crowd saying, "Oh, that we had here." Oh my gosh,
oh, sorry, you can't quite see it.
Oh, that we had here,
but 1 in 10,000.
Oh, that we had here, but 1 in 10,000 of those men in England that do no work today. In other words, the men in England that aren't here and in this army. And Henry's on the other side and says, "Who said that? Who said that? My cousin? Oh, no. And one of the things you want to look for in this speech is Shakespeare's and the Elizabethan world is big on value. One, more, few. Read the first scene in King Lear. How much, more, much, all, nothing. Love those words to help us feel the extremes of things. Remember our old friend antithesis from the last time I was here. So he says, "No, cousin, if we are marked to die, if it is our fate to die, we are enough." Enow is an old way of saying enough. We are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. So you've already got fewer, greater, no more. And that's his thesis right there. It's enough of our country to lose this many men. And the fewer of us that survive, the more honor we get. So right away, he introduces this concept honor. And sometimes, when I'm teaching, I say, we have to find what's honor in our life because it's not quite as huge a thing in some cultures as others. And so the idea that this is what they're fighting for, not pay, not food, but honor. And then he does
honor in Shakespeare's time. Do you have a sense of what that would have meant to him and to his fellow audience members? Do you think that it feels more serious than when we talk about honor in our time?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely sacred. I think that if your word, and you're being stripped of your honor, as so many plays, death is second. Honor and honor is first. And that's when in Measure for Measure, when Isabella says, they say, if I'll sleep with him, you can live. And he says, well, that's a fearful thing. And she thinks, but then I lose my honor. And he gets it. Her brother gets it. So it's a very, very big deal. He's offering them this. But he's also saying what honor means to him. And this is a motivational speaker thing. He's going to establish his credentials now. He's saying, I don't want gold. By Jove, that's his little swear word there. And swearing like that makes him feel like one of them too. I can use fancy, colorful language. I don't want gold. I don't care who dines, dines at my table, who eats my food. I don't want to have fancy clothes. You can have them. Those outward things dwell not in my desires. I don't want the outsider. But if it be a sin to want honor, then I'm the worst guy on earth, because I want honor. And then we go on, and he says, no.
No, I hit the wrong one. Sorry. I mean,
I think you were the right one.
Technical difficulties. Okay, here we go.
No faith, my cuz. That's it. And then he says, wish not a man, one man from England. There's that value again. And then he swears again, God's peace. I would not lose so great an honor as one man more. There's that antithesis, the big honor as one man more from England. So he's saying, I don't want one guy to come and help us fight because we lose a little honor. And he says, one man more methinks would share from me for the best hope I have. And in these times, the best hope I have meant eternal salvation. I would literally give up eternal salvation for this honor. Oh, do not wish one more. And that's that wonderful repetition. He repeats it again, almost like a little echo mantra. No. And that O in Shakespeare, O is a wonderful kind of steam valve for emotion. He doesn't like you to pause a lot. He keeps the language moving, but once in a while he gives you an O for feeling to come through. So he appeals to their feelings. Do not wish one more. Notice, for the best hope I have, oh, do not wish one more. All one-syllable words, 10 words in a line. So that it's a line packed with language. And then he says this brilliant thing. He says, hey, I got an idea. It's a little game. Tell somebody who doesn't have the stomach for this fight, so he's appealing to their bravery, that he can go home. And we'll give him money, and we'll give him a little free pass to travel. Let him go. Let him depart. And then he says, we would not die in that man's company. Again, all monosyllabic words except one, that fears his fellowship to die with us. Somebody's afraid to fight next to me. I don't want him next to me. I don't want to die in his company because he won't have my back. And this is why, as you'll hear later, the Band of Brothers that became such a beautiful, it was a whole mini series. It's a big thing in the military, the idea of a band of brothers, that he has your back and you have his. And then the Feast of Crispian is these two twins from the Middle Ages. It's nothing really that big, but it's a saint's day. It's actually one of the saints' days that the Pope kicked out in Vatican II. But he does appeal to a kind of holiness. This is a holy day. And so we're going to celebrate it, especially because every day we have our feast, we're going to also remember this battle. And then he tells them what they're going to get. He that outlives this day and comes safe home, I'm going to cry, will stand a tiptoe. Isn't that wonderful? That was a word from Shakespeare's time, tiptoe, when the day is named. And again, monosyllabic, except for that word tiptoe. And the sentence before this, he that outlives this day and comes safe home, all monosyllabic, except that one word. And rouse him at the name of Crispian. Again, monosyllabic except for the word Crispian. And then he says, what you're going to do. He that shall live this day and see old age, all one-syllable words, common language, will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors, call his neighbors over to dinner and say, guess what? Vigil is the night before, right? And say, tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars, all one syllables, and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. And then it's this wonderful thing about old men forget. Old men have problems remembering things, yet everything will be forgot, but he will remember. You'll remember this with advantages. You may even add things. You may even exaggerate and elaborate. You remember what feats he did that day. So again, monosyllabic, then shall our names, and he includes them with the fancy people, with all the noblemen, our names. And then he brings up all the great sort of noblemen. But I love what he says, familiar in his mouth as household words. So again, another thing that from Elizabethan times, that the idea of household words like Kleenex and, all the words we just say. So your name's going to be a household word. And then he puts himself, Harry the King, and then all his wonderful nobleness. And if you do see the Branna,
he's Harry, he's not Henry.
exactly.
So a little bit of familiarity, it seems like there.
Exactly, good one. And then all these places that if you ever go to England are all major cities with cathedrals in them. Exeter, Salisbury, Gloucester, they're big places now. So these guys did become super, super famous in history. But if you see in the Branna, they do a close-up on all these guys, and you just see how they would just go to the ends of the earth for him. And they say, so all these words will be in their flowing cups, in their wine, overflowing because they're drinking so much wine, freshly remembered. They will remember them again when they, on the Feast of Crispian, when they celebrate this battle. Okay, keep going. And then this amazing line, again, completely Anglo-Saxon, this story shall the good man, I'm going to cry again, shall teach, the good man teach his son. And of course, his daughter too. But the only two-syllable word in that line is story, story. And Crispin, Crispian, there'll never be a holiday, a Crispin's Day, never will go by from this day to the ending of the world. And so you get that wonderful antithesis of now and the future. But we in it, in this day, shall be remembered. Again, all monosyllabic except the word remembered. Ending, remembered. And then the most amazing line in the whole speech, I don't think I can say it without crying. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. And the wonderful alliteration of those two B's, because what we get next is the third B is blood. For he today that sheds his blood with me, all monosyllabic, except for today, shall be my brother. The king has taken him to be his own brother. Be he ne'er so vile, and vile doesn't mean mean things at that time. It just meant working class. If you were a working class person, this day shall gentle his condition. That means make him a gentleman. So no matter what your job is, if you were a working class person, today you're going to be noble. You're going to be a nobleman from being in this battle, because he says, he's saying, I will make you noble. And then he ends with a joke. It's so brilliant. He says, and those guys that Westmoreland said at the beginning of the speech, I wish we could have one of those guys that aren't working today come and be part of our army. He says, and those gentlemen in England, now in bed, shall think themselves accursed they were not here. They're going to go, oh man, I wish I had been there, and hold their manhoods cheap. They will say, I can't hold my head up as a man or a woman or as a dignified human, is cheap now. When while anybody talks that fought with us, while anybody is talking who was one of the soldiers that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day. And even when I do this in my class, like I had a young woman did a beautiful job, Emily, in my second year this year, did a beautiful job. And the class just jumped to their feet at the end and clapped their hands because of the power of that build.
One of the commenters, Peter Abdallah, saying, Ursula is right. Though I hate all war, I am tearing up as she reads this speech.
Well, and the real truth about the Band of Brothers is that it's not so much about the fighting of the war, but it's what you do together for a cause. And so, whether we're thinking about our beautiful healthcare workers or our doctors or our teachers who are on the front lines of this, they're doing it together. They're supporting each other. They're gathering together for a common cause. And that, I think, is what resonates so deeply with all of us.
And so after this speech in the play, then what?
Then they go on, and I don't do the brilliant, many brilliant ideas. They sharpen these sticks to make points, so all the French end up with their horses running into these sticks. They wait till the exact right time, and they go around the sides where the French are coming down, and they win this extraordinary battle. And they think that about 10,000 French died. In Shakespeare's play, only 29 English die, or I think he says 5 and 20, which is not really true. There was probably more than that, but it was a substantial difference between. And so the king gives up. They have a treaty, and he says, I want your daughter. And there's a charming scene in the Branagh. It's Emma Thompson, who is Kenneth Branagh's actual wife at the time, who doesn't speak any English and he doesn't speak any French, and yet they have this very charming scene where you get to the feeling that they actually did find love together, even though they came together over such wildly complicated circumstances. And then they had Henry VI, and it's a real and we sometimes feel in a speech, in a play, that this play could be called The Making of a King, and that in this speech, because he doesn't really know what to do the night before, he's kind of flummoxed, and in this speech he becomes a leader. He becomes the great king that he is, and that's why they win. And even the I remember Patrick doing this so beautifully. The herald for the French is just blown away by the wonder of Henry in this moment.
Well, it's interesting. As we were preparing for the session today, Ursula and I had originally been looking at a cut version of the speech, and I was like, well, that's interesting. Is this speech normally cut at all? And Ursula was like, no.
Never. Never.
Normally, I think in production we take a lot of chopping. We take a lot of cuts to these speeches, but this isn't a speech that you find cut very frequently.
Never. I mean, because the repetition is the power of it. That's the water that the boat is sailing on, and it's just perfectly written. It's tricky. I mean, dramaturg who I love dearly, Barry Kraft, says if you cut something from Shakespeare, it should be like having a tooth pulled. It should be necessary and it should hurt. So I might have said that last time too, but it bears repeating.
Well, I want to invite folks who are watching to go ahead and ask their questions. I want to ask you, as a voice to speech person, what does looking at the rhetoric closely, what does it do for actors and for directors and for the people who are creating the piece? Why are these mechanisms of creating persuasive language useful to people on the stage?
Oh, that's a great question. I think a lot of times, well, particularly, I don't want to slam American actors, but I feel like irony is sometimes dying in American sort of public speaking. And one of the great, and so a lot of times actors, when they work on powerful and passionate speeches, and this certainly is one, they want to throw a ton of emotion at it, and that's the way they get their point across. But if you really pay attention to how intricate and specific this rhetoric is, and you say one and greater and fewer, and if you have that repetition built in, if you just notice it, your voice will build in volume, pitch, intensity, and you don't have to make us feel, you don't have to feel so strongly that we don't feel when we listen to it. You just present this, poetry is very powerful on our hearts and souls, and poetry is made of rhetoric. Television commercials, we use onomatopoeia and the names of products, dash, flash, snap, crackle, pop. We use alliteration all the time. Did I do my alliteration speech last time? No, I did a commercial once for a photo place, and I had to say, finicky folks find Frodshams first for fast, friendly photo finishing, which is all f sound, not all f letter, but f sound, and it linked the words photo and Frodshams. So even things like alliteration, all that stuff makes your case for you. So if you can find it in the language and then just let it live, then the audience will get that feeling.
Kim's got a question here in the comments. How does
Okay.
rhetoric differ across different speeches in Shakespeare, particularly Henry V? Do you find that there are different devices used in different plays or in different moments?
I think that this one is particularly heavy on the monosyllabic chain. Imagery that in Love Saber's Lost, Berowne describing love and using all kinds of metaphor and simile to make to take the men out of their pedestrian idea about love is to this higher place. Some whole plays, Romeo and Juliet is an antithesis play, Richard II, even this play you think of more as a ladder play, which is a kind of rhetoric where you're building towards something. Some characters are like Berowne, for instance, in Love's Labor is much fancier rhetorically, and some of the king, who is much more about business, has a lot less rhetoric. And also the idea of anti-rhetoric is in lots of plays where the comic character doesn't know how to use it, wants to use it. Dogberry, for instance, in Much Ado says the wrong word all the time. That's an idea of anti-rhetoric. In Midsummer Night's Dream, Bottom says, "I see a voice." So he's messing up the rhetoric, trying to do it well. And then sometimes characters like Othello, Iago is being very clever in his arguments, and Othello, who is a general and very upper class, as he's disintegrating into jealousy, his speech gets more and more fragmented and he loses rhetoric. King Lear, "I will do such things," and he can't even finish the phrase. That's called an anacaluthon, fancy word. But that's an example of anti-rhetoric, where the rhetoric breaks down, which is kind of a symbol of the mind breaking down. So it's a wonderful Shakespeare, just so incredibly deft at how he mixes prose, poetry, rhetoric, anti-rhetoric. He used every device at his disposal to tell his stories, and we are so grateful that he's still alive in us.
Well, I have to say that looking at the rhetoric in this particular speech really helps me to understand both characterization, like in a way you can maybe see it as Henry, like he is both the king, this great king in this incredibly inspiring moment, but he's also drawing from the time that he spent in taverns hanging out with Falstaff. So it's interesting to sort of see him in this moment unify those two sides of his personality through rhetoric to create this incredible speech, which, allows the victory that he has in the past. So it's fascinating, both like language wise and character wise, to sort of see how it works is really, really interesting.
Well, and it's so interesting because in Henry IV-1, he is a party guy. His father's very disappointed in him. He's, stays up late, hangs out with Falstaff, who just drinks and eats and tells jokes. And he has a speech to the audience that says, "I planned this. I'm doing this because I want to get to know the common people." And some of us in Henry IV think, well, that's kind of an excuse. But here it is. Here it is. Pistol and Bardolph are in that army. And they were his pals in the tavern. And they see him and love him deeply. And Pistol, the night before, somebody says some mean things about the king. And Pistol says, "Don't you dare. He is the greatest man ever. And I'll kill anybody who says different." And so that speech in Henry IV comes back, and we see what a great king, what a smart king he was, even when he was in the bar.
Just ending with one comment. I think this is Liz here in the comments. "Until this group on book, I've avoided the history plays, but because of this close analysis of Henry V, I've started reading Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2. Yay!
Yay!
We love it. It does. And I said this when we first started reading Henry V, like I have found the history plays as a reader of Shakespeare, something that's hard to kind of break into, because it's hard to know, like, it just feels like a wash of people and a battle and and there's always somebody else, and I'm always trying to see, who is this talking? How am I supposed to understand this person? But certainly this play, I think, is so much a character study as well as a history piece. But I think the second is that as well, and Henry IV obviously has some great character study, which helps us, I think, ground us in the play as a reader. If the battles aren't our thing.
Yeah, and as this last history play for 10 years, he really had honed, getting that main sort of story and getting that fabulous battle. We like to see the swords and things, but also the little people, the character of Bardolph, and what Henry has to make a decision about whether to let Bardolph be killed, and who was his good friend, and what that meant to him. And also, Mistress Quickly has an amazing speech on the death of Falstaff in this. And then, of course, the delightful French princess and the French princess's maid, and that wonderful love scene at the end. So even though it's a history play, there's lots of surprises. The French court, the Dauphin, there's a wonderful scene right before this battle where they're all the French are talking about how great it's going to be, and they're going to get such good glory. And the Dauphin goes on and on about his horse, and they say, just shut up about your horse. He really humanizes all the various hierarchy of the people, and the working class people, as well as the noblemen.
Well, one of the things that, I had our colleague DJ Hopkins on to talk last week, and he, mentioned, as you did, that this is the play that sort of launches a period, which we have Hamlet, we have As You Like It, we have Julius Caesar, so we see at this moment all of these great plays, the skill and the flowering of the plays coming on in this period with Henry V.
Yeah.
Well, I'm conscious of our time. I want to thank you, Ursula, again for joining. Thank you so much. This has just been really delightful. I really learned a lot from going through this play, so thank you.
And
thank all of you.
Read it out loud, everyone. I bet you'll cry too.
As always, persuade your children to clean up the kitchen by reading them St. Crispin's Day speech. Okay, maybe that's just me. All right. Well, thank you again, Ursula. Thank you all. Please let me know what you want to do next in the group, and hopefully, if we keep going, we can have Ursula back again.
Yay! Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.